This is a question for Tim. As someone who worked on one of the later generations or iterations of Star Trek, and who, to my knowledge, was only involved sort of as an extra in the earlier iterations when Gene was still around, what do you feel the legacy of Star Trek was, working without Gene and working in the aftermath of his life and his legacy?
You mean coming in from the point that I came in later on in the franchise series? What I was really, as you can tell by the Voyager and the way the cast was put together, and also the stories and storylines, to me there was a profound consistency in, I think, what in our show, based on what Gene's original vision was. I mean, here again, we pushed the envelope. We had a female captain. We had a black Vulcan. You've never seen either one of those things before that, and those characters. And we had also the stories and storylines also pushed the envelope. We challenged a lot of things that are socially very important and very much discussed nowadays, and in some cases people are arguing and fighting over it. We've discussed it and dealt with those things very much on our show about series throughout, whether it was evolution, whether it was religion, the soul and where it goes after death. I mean, all those things we explored, not to mention the regular character dilemmas that we had to face, making very difficult decisions in our position. It was tremendously consistent, I think, with the original concept and original series. They just kept carrying it through on Voyager.
Can I ask if you guys don't mind, I want to ask a follow-up question, because that was a great question. And it was a collaboration, on the set and off the set. Was there a guiding light? Was there someone, I don't want to necessarily have to give a name, but was there someone out there who really kind of made sure people stuck to that? Or someone who brought more of that in?
Well, on our series, Rick Berman, who had worked with your father for many years, prior shows, he was the one that was in charge of that show. As all television shows are directed and controlled by the executive producers, we had very good writers on board of staff, Brandon Braga, Michael Piller, Jerry Taylor at the very beginning, and I think they all embodied and embraced, the philosophy of Star Trek and what it has meant in the past. And we as actors also had a chance, individually had a chance to give our input about the characters, but when it came down to the overall storylines, those generally came from the writers and the producers at the time. And these guys really were very much visionary. Michael Piller had some really wonderful ideas and concepts that he talked about, and brought to the table. Jerry Taylor, Lisa Klink, also a very good writer, and really the stories that came out that defined not only the characters and gave them their background, gave them their nuances. Again, the overall spectrum had to do with what kind of stories and what subjects that were dealt with. And again, the original cast put together by the three of them. That's what gave us that magic, man. It was definitely collaborative, but Rick had I think, you couldn't get anything by him. If he didn't like it, it wasn't going to be on the screen, and that was it.
Bob Picardo in the house, come on down. Let's talk about White Room for just a minute.
While I'm sitting here.
While the directors here, Voyager had changed from the past, and you want to talk just a little bit about your experience of being on the show?
Well, I am one of the few Star Trek actors through Voyager that didn't have the pleasure of knowing your dad personally. I know that Tim, Ethan Phillips, and John Delancey, who appeared a number of times on our show. There were many actors who had met Gene and worked with him. And by the time those of us who hadn't, by the time we auditioned for Voyager, I think he'd been past some three and a half years. But we would hear lots of stories. Delancey tells a story about when he first met your dad. And John did not know anything about Star Trek, so that when this big, imposing guy came out and said to him, "You make my words sound better than I ever imagined," or something like that. And John Delancey went, "Oh, you must be the writer." And he said, "I'm Gene Roddenberry." Roddenberry. Had no idea who he was, and then that's the beginning of the story. And of course, he went on to get to know him in his experience on Next Gen. I think probably Q is the most celebrated recurring character in the history of television, right? What other actor has done 12 guest appearances and turned it into a cottage industry? But as Tim said, we had 3 wonderful creators of Voyager: Michael Piller, Jerry Taylor, and Rick Berman. My mic is going in and out. Should I just give it up?
Take this one. That's awesome.
Thanks.
You're a hologram, so.
Yes. Yes, between my my magnetic containment field and microphone are mixing. And Voyager, of course, was conceived to be more like the original series because the Next Generation had introduced so many new alien species, and you felt between the Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, you felt like it was such a familiar neighborhood that the idea of Voyager and of sending us off to the Delta Quadrant, having us basically lost in space, was we would get back to sort of the pure adventure of the original series. And what was cool about our show was that obviously we're meeting all new aliens than you had seen before. Some of them were more successful than others, right? I mean, the Kazon always looked, I don't know, they just looked kind of weird to me. I mean, it's like, if you're a warp-capable species, but you still can't find water, you gotta ask yourself exactly how smart you are. We used to call our guest stars the Farhead of the Week because there's only so many different ways you can take, a human and make him look different. So we tended to focus on changing Farheads until we started having our all digital characters, which we did probably by season 3. I think we started having species 90210 or whatever it was called.
8479.
Whatever. I remember my phone number and a couple of others, that's it. But I'm not going to remember a species that's merely digits. Especially because I had to remember all that other crap I had to say. Just to pick up on what you said, there was one alien we had that had a woman's vagina in the middle of his heart. I mean, it was so obviously that's what it was. When the alien came to the set the first time, we all took a look at each other and went, is it just me? Or are these the mindfuck aliens?
Now she made love with, she had an interaction with a guy with a trunk.
By the fact that I would work on the show many times, I'd work on the show and I wouldn't know what the person really looked like because all I ever saw was them in makeup. So it'd be an entire week. Hi, how you doing? And I only saw them because they're there like, at 4 in the morning or whatever it was to get it on. By the time I come in, it's already done. And then it's an hour or so for them to get it off and I've gone home. So I in a week's time, I never knew what they actually looked like. And I think it was, I worked with from Seinfeld, Jason Alexander. He came, I never actually saw him without his makeup on. A single time, And some of those, by that time, they were getting even more elaborate. They were doing neck pieces and they were doing full-on prostheses, so it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So he hasn't asked a question yet. So
Two more questions, you guys.
Is there going to be a Voyager motion picture? Any chance?
Only if you produce it.
Yeah.
I wish I could.
Can you get on that?
Yeah, that's sorry.
They are available.
I don't think Paramount will let me.
They're not, you guys will know about that before we would, actually. I sincerely believe that. The fans would know before we would know. No, there's no plan. I think that JJ's doing his features, and he's got 3 scheduled, so I don't see that happening.
The theme I noticed with both of the films and Rob, with your journey and sort of all of you up here is, questioning the nature of humanity, what it means to be human. And I guess I'm just curious, Bob, if you could share a little bit with what you might have learned playing a, non-humanoid character who's learning to be human. And then Rod, if you could share a little bit of how that maybe relates to what you think your dad's vision of humanity was, and he seems so socially justice oriented, at least in his willingness to challenge.
Absolutely.
I was fairly like Rod, I suppose. When I came to this experience not knowing much about Star Trek, I remembered as a kid when it was on watching Lost in Space. I think, which is probably why I stole much of the Doctor from Mr. Smith on Lost in Space, because I hadn't really seen much of the original species. The original series. So I was an innocent, and I think that ultimately served me. I told everyone when I was cast in, I said I got the new Star Trek series. It'll run for 7 years. It'll put my children through college, but I have to tell you, I got the worst part of the show. They said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, I play this like machine type thing. It's described as colorless, humorless, a computer program of a doctor. Does that sound like a lot of fun for 7 years?" So I was completely wrong. I went into it not knowing that I had gotten the plum role of the show. He had 9 lines in the pilot. It seemed like it couldn't be duller. And then like 2 or 3 episodes in, I went, "Oh, wait a minute. I think I get it. I think I see it now." When I think Kess's character came down to sickbay looking for soil samples, and then the doctor bitches that he has this incredible wealth of programmed knowledge, all of these medical textbooks, the combined experience of all these Starfleet medical officers, including, Dr. McCoy, that he's like the star relief pitcher, and then let me get your dirt. So when I understood that the essence of what his problem was, what his attitude was, that he was programmed for incredible things, but a lot of what he would be used for would be mundane, then I understood the essence of what was the essential joke of the character, which was his bad attitude. That he was a piece of software that did not behave. That's an intrinsically funny joke. But also, what's wonderful about it is that he was driven to improve himself all the time, to expand and become more valuable. As he developed relationships in the crew, he wanted to be more and more valuable. So there was all these wonderful things that unfolded before my imagination, shortly before they unfolded before yours. So the fact that I entered it without any expectation, I think ultimately served me and made the ride that much more fun for me to play. The other great thing about playing that character is I didn't have to obey any of the rules of a Starfleet officer. I could react with all these negative qualities. I could be cowardly, I could be self-involved, I could be arrogant and a windbag, and all these fun things to do that you weren't used to seeing someone in a Starfleet costume do. So there were all, I guess what you would say is I lucked out. All I had to do was not be like Brent Spiner.
I think Bob and Tim had the best parts of Voyager, in my opinion, because it's always the alien character that sort of shows us our humanity. And when I say alien, I just mean not human. And that was really big with my father. You just brought up Data, Brent, but that originally came from the Questor tapes, which I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with. My father did a series did a pilot for a series back in 74, 76. And it went out as a 2-hour pilot, and it was about an android that was missing some programming and wanted to find its creator. Go to YouTube, check it out. It's awesome. Anyhow, that's where Data came from. But my father always loved taking these characters, and they were just his way of sort of showing us ourselves and showing us what we take for granted and making us think a little bit. And I think Bob and Tim did that. And you can see that in not just every Star Trek incarnation, but every concept my father ever came up with. And so those have always been my favorite. From Spock to Data all the way up. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Unfortunately, we've got to get going. Let's hear it to them coming out. Thank you very much for supporting the Burbank International Film Festival. and we'll see you next year. Thank you so much. God bless you.